The title of the symposium that we'll all be doing together in April is Beyond Anatomy. And, we're just at the beginning of starting to get questions from people who are curious about it or who might be participating in the event. And the questions are broad because the title is broad. So this is a nice chance for us to gather in advance and just talk a little bit initially about what does that even mean to us? What is beyond anatomy? And so I'd like to hear from each of you one at a time, and maybe we can start with you, Leslie. What do you think beyond anatomy means?
Okay. Well, yeah, it may seem odd for someone that's co-author of a book called Yoga Anatomy to basically be, I don't know, blowing his brand by putting together a symposium called Beyond Anatomy. But partly it comes out of my experience, and I know that Amy shares this to some extent as well, of being people to whom everything gets forwarded. Everything that shows up on Facebook or the internet that has anything to do with anatomy and yoga, or whatever the latest meme is, it ends up on my computer. And a lot of times there's a note attached to it, well, what do you think of this? Because some of it's frankly just weird and bizarre. It leads to a certain perspective, I think, that I've developed over the years of just questioning whether this whole attempt to explain what's happening to us when we do something like yoga, or even when we're breathing and moving, just in anatomical terms. Now, I understand the motivation. It's the same thing that I had when I got into it, is that, I wanted to know what was going on a deeper level. I wanted to know what was going on below the surface. I wanted to have some explanations for what I was, not just what I was experiencing as a practitioner of yoga, but most especially what I was seeing in the people I was teaching. Why certain people had this limitation or this ability, and all the differences that showed up. So I understand the motivation for wanting an explanation. That was my motivation, to have something solid that would explain what I was seeing, would explain what I was feeling. But in all the years I've been doing this, which is 37 years now, what I've realized, especially as a result of having collaborated with Amy on the book and being recognized out there now in the world as the co-author of this book, it's like there's a certain, I don't know, it feels impoverished almost to try to fit the richness of our human experience of being alive and breathing on this planet with gravity into this story that is anatomy, and in particular, an approach to anatomy that comes from Western civilization, which is not that old compared to how old our civilization is. That tends to look at things as having beginnings and ends, origins and insertions, and tends to look at us as a collection of parts and pieces. And so the question for me is, what is beyond that perspective? That is informed by science and research and a knowledge of anatomy, but can go beyond the conversation of trying to explain our experience purely with anatomy. Mm-hmm. So that to me is sort of the starting point for the conversations we hope to have, that I hope to be having during the symposium. So that's sort of as brief an answer to that as I can think of giving.
Yeah, and you're describing a certain initial desire for a lot of people to concretize.
Yeah.
To say it's this piece is this, and then of course we name things. And so I'm curious, for you in your own learning and in your own practice right now, what is an example of something, and I'm sure there are many things, but what is something that you would describe as being beyond anatomy for you?
Sure. Okay. Just to give an obvious example, I mean, one of the very first realizations that and I think many people made is like, why am I having trouble doing a forward bend? Like, we'll just take a seated forward bend, which I've never been particularly good at. I'm one of those sort of tight hamstring people. But I didn't even know I had hamstrings before I started trying to do forward bends, you know, and then that's how a lot of people learn that they actually have hamstrings, you know. It's like, what's keeping me from going forward? And you feel something back here and it's limiting you. It's like, oh, what's that called? Oh, it's a hamstring. Oh, how can I loosen my hamstring? And so, you know, when I first started trying to understand these things and got more and more details and more understanding of, you know, the role of the nervous system, for example, in limiting your range of motion, and especially the role of breathing, which became a real specialty for me. When I do that same posture now, you know, 38 years after I started attempting that posture, it's an entirely different experience. It has nothing to do with my hamstrings, you know, and in a certain sense, I hesitate to say that it has less to do with my body, because everything has to do with my body, because, you know, I'm in it all the time. I'm not trying to get out of it. But it has to do with the conversation about my history and my past and my expectations and my desire to be able to do something today that I was able to do yesterday. You know, when in fact the thing that is most valuable and feeds my soul the most, the thing that I can do today that I wasn't able to do yesterday, is to stop trying to do the thing I was able to do yesterday.
Yeah.
That's an accomplishment. That's like, it's a yogic accomplishment, which doesn't involve getting my chest on my thighs, you know? And so these conversations to me are kind of beyond anatomy, you know? But they're triggered, of course, by having a body that has hamstrings. And, you know, how can I breathe with this moment? How can I, because I have a history with seated forward bends for all the thousands and thousands of times I've done them, you know? And so it becomes a very, very rich conversation about how to be present with my desire to hold on to an accomplishment, and maybe letting that go and accomplishing something that's even more valuable, which is letting go. And the weird thing is, when I do let go of trying to make it happen, I notice I get a little closer to my thighs. It's just weird that way.
Yes, one of life's great mysteries. When you stop grabbing, things shift. Yeah.
Shift happens.
Yes, shift happens. Well, thank you, Leslie.
Okay.
And Amy, same questions, because the whole point here is that we're all going to have completely different views. I'm curious, coming into this symposium, what do you think Beyond Anatomy even means to you?
I think that Beyond Anatomy, what do I think it means? I think that for me, there's something interesting, again, about the limitations of knowledge. And I have been, I came into studying anatomy hoping that learning anatomy would help me get control of some things in my body. And it certainly allowed me to control and manipulate a certain amount of things, but I hit a limit about what I could control. And what I could control through willfulness, and what I could control through knowledge. And for me, that's a kind of limit about thinking that knowledge will serve me rather than trust or experience or practice, or I'm going to say trust again. And so it's interesting, because as I've been thinking about doing this symposium, you know, some people have asked me if it means that I'm leaving altogether anatomy behind. And I want to keep acknowledging what anatomy has done for me, and how useful it is as a way in, but it's not the end of the process. So for me, one of the things about the idea of Beyond Anatomy is that anatomy is a starting place for the exploration, but it's not a finishing place. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you're describing the difference. And for me, I know this has been huge between having ideas about things, mental ideas, and mentally being able to wrap your brain around things and conceptualize things, and actually having an experience of your body in a way that's not limited by those ideas, which I think is a huge deal.
Yes. And in the years that I've been studying anatomy, it's also been, I've watched the information shift. So things that we thought we knew, things that we were really clear about, have been proven to be incomplete, not true, something else altogether. And so I came into anatomy and embryology and physiology and kinesiology and all these related fields with the idea that I could master this knowledge and I would be finished. Yeah. And it turns out that it's not done. It keeps changing. So I've had to make it be about something else and be more about the questions than about mastery in some way. And the more I think I know, the more I also realize I don't know. And the more I see what the limits of the knowledge are. Like, there are questions that there is not an answer to. For all the research I can do, nobody yet that I have found that has written anything down about it has written a body of work on the embryological origins of the, what can I find? Like the cornea of the eye has been done, but like the pia mater, the like inner lining of the meninges, there's not a clear answer to where that came from embryologically. There's tons of information out there that thing is it's like an unfindable bit of knowledge. And I'm sure I'm going to say that and someone's going to email me some study about where it came from. So,
sure.
But whatever, there's something that we don't know. And there's much more we don't know than we know.
Yeah, and it's always changing. Like you said, constant shifting sands. We don't get to forever 100% know anything.
Yeah, exactly.
And so what is something in your current exploration or practice or teaching that you would call or describe as being beyond anatomy for you?
For me right now, I think that the biggest thing is probably the developmental work that I do, which is looking at how we learn to move from being born. Really, we look at getting to walking through. So what happens in the first year or two of life? And I do that work with adults, but I also do that work with infants. And the interesting thing about working with infants themselves is that the anatomy, like it doesn't apply because their anatomy is really different. And like infants are so fluid. They're so, the whole idea of muscles and leverage and bones, it doesn't apply, it doesn't matter, it doesn't work like that. And their movements are, when they have all their choices available, there's such a whole body experience about relating to gravity, relating to other people, relating to space, and their breath and their curiosity and their desire. Like, these are the motivating things, not whether or not they have a strong multifity or whether their psoas is tight. Like, that means nothing in the realm of infant movement. So it like, that's put all these things in perspective for me. And then teaching people, just working with infants, working with grown-ups, like, naming the psoas does not change someone's experience automatically.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
So Peter, now you know the drill, but I'm curious for you, coming into the symposium, what does beyond anatomy mean? What do the words even mean to you?
It's a good question. One I've been asking myself for quite a long time. Because I studied as an osteopath, I trained as an Iyengar yoga teacher. It was all about anatomy. And a bit like Amy, I thought the answers were there. And both Iyengar and osteopathy, or certainly in the time when I was doing that, the sort of late 80s, early 90s, you were kind of expected, or you gained a lot of kudos by understanding a lot of anatomy. And one of the things I find amusing is that the more anatomy you know, the more people take notice of you and they believe you on almost any subject. You know your anatomy.
So many big words to say, yes.
Yeah, a lot of big words. And the more anatomy you could spout, the more people started taking notice of you. And I probably built my reputation in the UK on teaching exactly what I don't teach now. And I think it changed. So why did it change? There's a question I was trying to think. A bit like Amy, there's a limit to what you can resolve just by naming things. That's clearly true. But I think I bumped into a few people that changed my view. One was a guy called Serge Grakovetsky, who you probably are aware of, who was very influential in my changing my thinking by really sort of saying we should stop worrying about anatomy and start thinking about function. In other words, don't put the cart before the horse. Understand what something is, what you're trying to do, or what the purpose of a creature's functioning is, and then you try and understand the anatomy in the light of that. It makes more sense than trying to understand function in the light of anatomy. You can't reverse engineer function from studying anatomy. I think that was his main point, and it took a while for that to sink in. The other person I met was my wife, who's a Feldenkrais teacher, and she works with babies too. So she, like Amy, works a lot with infants and childhood movement. And Feldenkrais's work's always been interesting to me, and he's never been that interested in anatomy. He's Mr. Function. So, that was also an important thing. And the other guy, well, the other two influences were Vanda Scaravelli, who we have over here. It's quite kind of big name in the UK. And she's a very good bridge from Iyengar type, yoga, because she studied with Iyengar and Desikachar, and then kind of dropped them both for the idea that what she became interested in was how you felt when you practiced. What do you feel in relationship to gravity, the breath, and the release of muscles? There were kind of three big themes. So when I started meeting teachers who had worked with her, my whole thing from Iyengar, which was work as hard as you possibly could, strain every sinew, to do as little as possible to achieve a similar result. What's the least effort you could use instead of what was the most effort? That was quite a radical change. So that was big. And then a guy called Stanley Kellerman. Do you know him?
I don't know him.
Stanley Kellerman wrote a book called Emotional Anatomy. He's a psychotherapist, I think, who realized that all experience was embodied. So he started working. I went to see him talk a couple of times in London, and he said one of the opening statements was he became interested in why people's bodies change shape over time. And what he didn't mean was getting fat or thin. He meant why did they, change shape, become tense, change their posture. So he became very interested, or he interested me in the way we carry our emotions around, how they shape us, how they drive us forwards, and how we're driven forwards from our past. So that was very interesting. And, through those kind of things, again, I think similar to Amy and Leslie's comment about becoming more interested in the nervous system. Currently, I feel that's the only place to be. That's the only thing I'm really very interested in. Anatomy shapes itself around the things we do, not the other way around. I think, at the moment. That's what I think. It's, so I now, I'm not particularly, or I never say I'm trying to exercise people or affect their anatomy. I'm trying to influence their nervous system. So think about working with the nervous system, not their anatomy. That's what's happened to me.
Yeah, and all of you are describing so beautifully, I think, the fact that this isn't an end game situation. And I think that's what's really exciting about doing this event and having these conversations, and that we can, you know, show the example that I think we all have of being really dedicated students and learners and practitioners and teachers. And in the end, it just keeps going and going and going. So like you just said, Peter, you know, right now,
Yeah, we can say.
check in with any of us a year from now, and we'll see. So
Very frustrating for students.
yeah, it is, but hopefully also liberating, I think, to see that at the end, we all come to a place of, you know, more learning and more evolving and exploring.
Sure.
Yeah.
So thank you.
That's my thing. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks, Brooke. Well, can I ask you, what do you think about Beyond Anatomy?
Yeah, I have been a A+ student of collecting everyone's maps, I think. And I really did start the podcast. It's so funny. It feels really naive to me now. It was very sincere, but my sincere and naive goal was, I'm going to talk to all the smartest people I know about the body. And I had been in the field for, I don't know, 14, 15 years when I started the show. And I'm going to collect them all, and I'll come up with the perfect map that helps the most people to feel really good in their bodies. And of course, it really felt like, you know, I've said to people about the show, it felt like looking into the abyss, and then the abyss looked back into me. And I was like, oh, there's no perfect map. And well, like you said, Amy, it's so useful to enter these things from an intellectual understanding place. So I'm not trying to just chuck that, disregard it, or even put down any of my journey or anyone else's learning journey. But at a certain point, it became just, what is my experience of my body at any given present moment? And like you were saying, Leslie, like it's, that's sort of the big win, is to not be so attached to things looking the same as they looked the other day, or the way I want them to look however many days from now. So I'm really grateful that we've all gathered to have this conversation, because for me, it's actually blown open this, nothing I ever would have anticipated. I really thought I'm going to find all the smartest maps and really help people find the best maps for getting rid of pain and resolving mobility or functionality issues. And instead, it's become this whole wacky spiritual journey of like, what is anything? Like, what is the body? What is reality? And if you had told me that that's what I would be talking about as a result of my work in the somatic field, never would have believed it. So I find it endlessly fascinating. I really don't think our bodies are what we think they are. And I think that whatever our path in to be curious about them is great. And just, you know, get ready for a surprising ride and see what you find.
Yeah.
Great. I can't think of a better way of summing it up. So I anticipate having a big room full of really curious people to hear the continuation of this conversation on April 1st and 2nd, 2017 in New York City.
Yeah, it's gonna be cool.